the real privilege and honor, well, not that that's not with you too, Sharon, but Rachel has been part of rethinking psychiatry for many years, and we've never had the opportunity to have her be one of our presenters, so we're very excited about that. So this is about Warmline, and they call it a hotline? Well, crisis line. So welcome.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here. Big thank you to Cindy for finding a last minute venue. There was a double booking miscommunication situation, but I'll tell that as well. So big thank you to Cindy and to Critical Resistance. And my name is Rachel. I'm a social worker. I've worked on a crisis line for years. I work for Lines for Life, which is the Oregon State chapter of the National Suicide Lifeline. So I'll be talking about crisis lines. I call this the good, the bad, and the scary because I've heard people say very mixed things about calling a crisis line. I've heard some people say that they called a crisis line and it saved their life and it was a huge help. I've heard other people say they called a crisis line and that they felt very dismissed, or that police were called and it ended up making the situation worse. And it can be very scary to reach out for help, especially if you're feeling like you're at your very lowest point already. So the purpose of the presentation is to explain different kinds of crisis lines and how they work, clear up common myths about crisis lines, explain your rights when calling a crisis line, explain what crisis lines can and can't do, and to discuss how the experience of calling a crisis line can be less scary and more helpful. So there are different kinds of crisis lines. There's the National Suicide Lifeline, which every state has a chapter. So if you call from an area code from that state, you'll get the office in that state, regardless of whether you're physically in that state or not. There are county and state crisis lines, like the Multnomah County crisis lines. A lot of mental health agencies have their own crisis lines. There's the Military and Veterans Crisis Line, and the National Veterans Crisis Line is actually the same number as the National Suicide Lifeline, and when you call it says Veterans Press 1. There's specific populations. There's the Trevor Project for GLBTQ youth, the Trans Lifeline. There are also hotlines for people with specific conditions. For example, the Alzheimer's Association has a hotline for either people with dementia or caregivers, care partners, and domestic violence and sexual assault crisis lines. As many of you may have heard, there's been a lot of sexual assault crisis lines are reporting that they're getting a lot more calls recently because of the recent current events. So those are the basic different kinds of crisis lines. And there can be a lot of fears about calling a crisis line. It is scary. You may have heard people who've had maybe not so great experiences. One thing that kind of helped inspire this presentation, I read an article in Mad in America, which is a website with mental health articles, a great website, but a lady had written about her friend having a really terrible experience calling the National Suicide Lifeline. I hope it wasn't someone at our office, but saying that the person they talked to was just kind of barking out questions like, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Saying, if you tell me you have a plan, I'm going to call the police. I was pretty dismayed to read that, and that's not how it should have gone. That is not our training. There is a limit to what crisis lines can do, and we do have certain guidelines, but that's not the treatment anyone should get when they call a crisis line. I know it does happen, but it doesn't happen every time. Unfortunately, our system is often very liability driven, very time driven, and not really focused on hearing people and helping people. I can honestly say where I work is definitely one of the better organizations. So I would honestly be very surprised if someone I work with had responded that way. I can honestly say that, but I know that does happen. So just wanted to kind of address those fears, and also to say, if that happens, you can always You can always ask to speak to someone else. You can always end the call and call again. Will they ask intrusive questions? It depends. Some crisis lines gather more information than other. You can always decline to answer any questions. And we're trained not to power struggle with people if they don't want to give information. So you shouldn't be getting any kind of pushback if you decline to answer certain questions. Will they say they can't talk to me if I'm not suicidal? They shouldn't. There can be a lot of it. You can have a lot of issues with without being suicidal. Person could call because they're having a panic attack, or they just woke up from a nightmare, or something really upsetting happened tonight. So you should not be given that message. There is a limit to what they can do on a crisis line, and it's generally there for brief in the moment support, but they should still talk to you and provide support if you're going through a tough time but not thinking of suicide. Will they judge me? Hopefully not. I feel like where I work, people, they're very understanding that we all go through tough times. A lot of people, there's one of my coworkers, his name is Steven. He's actually been on the news about his own suicide attempt. I really admire his courage. I feel like where I work, they're much more understanding that everyone goes through hard times. But again, if you feel like the person's being really judgmental, you always have the option to hang up and call again. Are the calls recorded? That varies from crisis line to crisis line. Where I work, the calls are recorded for quality and training. They're kept in a locked, secure place. The only time they would ever be able to, that the call recording would ever go outside the office would be if there was a court order. That very, very rarely happens. So on some crisis lines, the calls are recorded, but it does stay in the office. What if someone I know answers? That's very rare. I could count on one hand the number of times that's happened to me in years working on a crisis line, and could count on the other hand the number of times it's happened to other people I know. If we answer the call and somebody we know is on the line, we're supposed to transfer the call. And if you know that somebody you know is working for one of the crisis lines, there are a lot of different options. So you can always call another crisis line where you don't know anyone. So that's unlikely, and if it happens, you can just end the call and call again. Will my confidentiality be protected? In most cases, yes. We really do try to avoid calling the police. I can honestly say I don't like calling the police. I don't think most of my coworkers like calling the police. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Will they call CPS, Child Protective Services, or Adult Protective Services on me? Also, something we only do as a last resort if we feel like there's a serious safety issue. And it's up to you, how much or how little information you want to share. That can be a hard thing. For example, a parent who's really struggling, who's afraid that calling could lead to their kids getting taken away. That's not likely. Even if we do have to make a report to Child Protective Services or Adult Protective Services, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do anything with it, much less that kids or a person they're taking care of will get taken away. So I understand those fears, but those things are not likely, and we try to avoid those as much. We try to avoid that as much as possible. Your rights when you call a crisis line: you have the right to be treated respectfully. You have the right to call anonymously or use an alias. Sometimes people call from a blocked number. Obviously, we encourage people to be as honest as possible. And the more information we know, the better we can help you. However, if the only way you feel comfortable is calling from a blocked number or anonymously, that you have every right to do that. You have the right to decline to answer any questions. You have the right to a language interpreter or to a TTY service if applicable. That would be the hearing impaired service. We also have text service, so that can be a good option for people who are hearing impaired or for a variety of other reasons. They don't want someone to overhear what they're talking about. They don't like to talk. You have the right to have your confidentiality respected and protected unless there's a very serious safety reason to break confidentiality. Of course, the tricky thing is there are a lot of gray areas in this situation. That's a very subjective thing. And we are supposed to err on the side of doing the least restrictive form of help. But it is subjective. One thing Grace suggested that I bring up that I think is a good suggestion is, if you call a crisis line and you just are not feeling like this person is helpful, if you are feeling like they're disrespectful, they're not listening, whatever, or like it's just not a good match for whatever reason, some people might be afraid that if they hang up, they'll call the police. You can say something like, I really don't want to hurt myself, but this is not helpful, and I'm going to call again later, and talk to someone else, or I'm going to call a different place. So that will greatly reduce the risk that they would call the police. We're only supposed to call police if we really feel like somebody is in serious danger. You have the right to self-determination and the least restrictive treatment. That's kind of along those lines. And we may not agree with choices somebody is making, but those are their choices to make. And in some cases, calling a Warmline may be more appropriate, which Sharon will get into. But it saddens me when I hear people say that they've had bad experiences calling crisis lines. I know that does happen, but I know it also can be a huge help. And in some cases, it can save a person's life. And I wanted to end with a quote from somebody who sadly did die by suicide. But it's a hopeful quote, but the story unfortunately ended in tragedy and heartbreak, but it didn't have to end that way. And a story does not have to end that way. And for some people, reaching out at their darkest point really can save their lives.
I am so glad to be invited here, and also just to connect and have the conversation about what's going on at Lines for Life and what they do, and the contrast with what we do at the Warmline and how it is used, which is actually very differently. I'm going to talk just very briefly about Warmlines in general, talking about our wellness on the line, right? I mean, Warmlines are very different than crisis lines. It is peer support that we provide by phone. And I've got to say, I'm a person who's worked with peer support as one of my primary concerns since 1995. And I've done a lot of other programs with direct people interacting peer support, lots of different styles of doing peer support. But now that I've done a lot of different things, I totally love working on the Warmline because it's like the purest form of peer support you can possibly imagine. We train people in intentional peer support. They're on the phone with somebody, just being present with them. There is no other force or influence that's trying to get them to do anything different or questioning their ability to just really be present with the person who's calling. And that is really awesome. There is no crisis necessary. And indeed, when I show you, I've got a slide in here that shows why people call the Warmline. But over a 5-year period, there have been a total of 186 calls in which someone said that they were feeling suicidal. A lot of those calls are just like someone's talking about their feelings, not like I'm about to go do it. So we really, on the whole, don't deal with the same kinds of intensity of crisis, and I'm ready to go. That's a very unusual call for the Warmline. And like I said, it's about doing the peer support. Peer support is not about fixing someone. It's not about changing them. It's absolutely about not having an agenda for that other person other than being present and having a really connecting mutual exchange that helps both people to kind of look and reflect and grow as a result of having had that connection and that interaction. So that's what we're about. In the U.S. right now, according to Warmlines.org, there are about 90 Warmlines operating. And so, Warmlines have really, I think that they really started picking up in the 80s, and they're, one thing that's awesome about them, and even where our Warmline came from, our agency, Community Counseling Solutions, is an Eastern Oregon agency, serving as the mental health authority in 4 of the counties in the Gobi eastern part of the state. But, it originated from that organization because they were looking for opportunities to provide peer support. And when people are really spread out in a rural area, being able to provide that peer support over the phone really makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of where our roots are. Even though now, the highest percentage of our callers are from the Portland metro area, we do have that Eastern Oregon rural roots, and we do still continue to provide support to a lot of people that are really spread out in places where they would be very isolated without the telephone. So it's pretty awesome. There can be lots of different types of warm lines, and I think our warm line has actually evolved over time. I hear about people who were carrying cell phones, and then the calls were like based in county offices, and people were like only serving from one location. Of course, we have gotten way more sophisticated than that now, using phone VoIP technology through the internet, and so it doesn't matter where a person is working throughout the state. In one of our 6 offices, we can have people in constellations in different locations picking up the phone, and all of it just works through the amazing Zendesk technology. I had the opportunity to be responsible for a Warmline once before, and when I lived in Santa Barbara in 2007, and we had something that we created, we called the Hope Line. And really, that was a great name because that's what it's about. It's like, especially when someone's feeling down or alone or hopeless, to connect with another person who's actually in a state that we're able to share some hope. That is a beautiful thing that happens through Warmlines. Warmlines can be paid peer support employees. People often assume that we at the David Rumphrey Oregon Warmline are supporting a lot of volunteers, but that's not the case. We have a staff of about 25 people, and they are certified peer support specialists. They're trained in intentional peer support, and they're all paid. We don't currently have any volunteers. That's not really part of what we're doing. Except Newman is a volunteer, and he is so generous with his time. He'll come and he'll just sit on the couch. Yes, in Oregon for the David Rumphrey Oregon Warmline, and that includes 3 full-time staff who are supervisors, such as the wonderful Robin Candle, who's sitting behind you, and then most of the people who are actually the peer support specialists on the line work up to 19 hours a week. There have been a couple of people who have done it full time, but it's a really tough job to do full time. Let me tell you, I love having had the experience of getting on the phones and supporting people. It's something I get to do from time to time when we're short staffed, and it's a great experience. Like, just, you don't know who's going to call, you pick up the phone and you get to talk to whoever's there, and it's pretty amazing. But doing that 40 hours a week, I think, would be horrendous. Like Rachel was saying, compassion fatigue, that would definitely be a burnout. Let's see, so studies show, thanks to my wonderful support person who does great research for us, Kim, there's a study that was done with 480 callers over a 4-year period that showed distinctively a reduction in use of crisis services and a reduction in the experience of isolation for people who were actively using the Warmline. And we talked about repeat callers. I just want to say we do get a lot of repeat callers. We like kind of joke about it that we're the Warmline family, but that, you know, that caring connection that we provide to people, a lot of times when the phone rings, you know, it is someone that we know because they're people that we've talked to over a period of years. There are people that have used our service for over 10 years. So, you know, there is a lot of familiarity, and as long as, you know, our guidelines and policies say that our operators are not allowed to pursue those relationships, those friendships that they have over the line, that can't be continued out in real life. We don't get together with our callers and things like that. There's kind of a boundary around it just to maintain the consistency of providing the peer support, not crossing that line. But it's wonderful that we know them. They love to be known by us, and they actually, you know, a lot of our callers, you know, love tracking what's going on with us in our lives, and they know all about us and love that. So we really provide, and in general, Warmlines provide an important connection for people who live with big feelings, visions, voices, addictions, or loneliness. And that's the other thing that's really cool about the program that I think is amazing, is that someone does not have to be diagnosed. They don't have to be, they don't have to have any kind of a label. All they have to do is pick up the phone and dial because they want to talk to someone who's going to listen to them and really pay attention. So that's pretty awesome. So that's us, the David Romprey Oregon Warmline. I want to tell you guys, I brought a bunch of materials. I hope you'll pick up. We just got some new cards printed. Take a big handful of them. They're cards that just say our hours, our phone number, and they're just designed to give out to people that might want to put it in their pocket and maybe give us a call sometime. So we're really happy to distribute those kind of materials. There's also brochures. We are the David Romprey Oregon Warmline. How many people in this room already know about David Romprey? Okay, so I love that our program is named after a really strong, really just absolutely committed peer leader and advocate. And to me, it just speaks to the fact that our program is a peer program and we get to excel in that same way, providing leadership, doing new things, and creating things that really work to allow people to live the lives they deserve and that they choose for themselves. We're open every single day. Holidays, you know, holidays are, as I was saying, often a busy time because people feel that loneliness more if they're not able to connect with family or friends on that day. Every day from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. we're open. There's no referrals necessary, no screening, no anything but hello. We're not a crisis service, and you know, although we will certainly talk to anyone who calls. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what happens when we do get the unusual call that someone is in a crisis. But on the whole, our purpose is to really connect and enrich lives. And I would really think of it as more of a prevention service. And the state apparently thinks that's a good idea too, so they've really been supportive of us for quite a long time. And all of our employees are peer support specialists. We're big on IPS. Now, I don't know if you can really read these reasons, but I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to see this. This is over the 5-year period, the last 5 years that of every call we get, we fill out a log with just a few questions, and one of them is why people called. So this big one right here is anxious, scared, afraid, happy, you know, having big feelings basically. This one that you see here is depression. The tall green one on the right side is lonely, isolated, shut in. So really the two biggest reasons are just like anxious, scared, or having big feelings, or feeling lonely and shut in. The other reasons are all like very secondary to those big reasons that people call us. Big feelings, you know, a lot of times people are diagnosed with mental health issues, and we're sort of told that if we're very highly emotional or we have big feelings, that those are a result of whatever, bipolar or some other kind of a mood disorder. And so it's just a way of saying, yeah, we have big feelings, but we're not going to necessarily label it.
Intense.
Yeah, intense, yeah. We have the Warmline, and we have one other program that we started a little over a year ago that is for the seniors. And the senior program is called the Oregon Senior Peer Outreach. And Todd is the person who has really worked very hard to develop and run that program. But it's really parallel to the Warmline, and I kind of wanted to talk about it just a little bit because it's the whole purpose of that program is to decrease loneliness and isolation in seniors. And all the different, I don't know if you guys know this, there's just terrible health outcomes that people who experience intense loneliness in old age have just an array of health problems. I mean, it can even way increases your chances of death. So it's a very serious issue, and we're working to reduce that through a telephone support program that's outcalling our peer support specialists who are also seniors. Call them once a week at a regular time and develop that relationship over time. And it's a beautiful thing. I think it's worth sharing just because it kind of shows what we're about. Like the Warmline provides that warmth to anyone who calls into us. The senior program, we're calling them just to help because they're really facing some big challenges. But this is our overall vision for both programs. We connect with curiosity and mutual respect to learn and grow with our healing community. That curiosity and mutual respect that's a reflection of the intentional peer support that is like our core training. Everyone has to have that training before they can work in one of our programs. And it's it's something that we're really working on as a group. Like, how far can we take this? How much can we just live these values every day? This is you might recognize that poster from Intentional Peer Support. But we take this stuff pretty seriously, and I just felt I couldn't talk about the Warmline without really mentioning this. These are the 4 tasks that when you're learning to do intentional peer support, you think about doing them, and they kind of work in this order: connecting with the other person, exploring worldview. That's that wonderful curiosity of how did this other person get to where they are, and really approaching another person with that much curiosity. It's shocking kind of what can come out that wouldn't have come out if you just went right on to the next thing in a problem solving mode. It's very, very different. There's so many things that we're taught we can't talk about, right? There's so many things that are just taboo, they're shameful, whatever. But when you get with another person and there's just so much receptiveness and so much openness, you actually can say and think about things that you actually hadn't talked about before, and you're able to sort of rethink it.
So curiosity.
And it doesn't mean prying. And if someone is too aggressive with questions, exploring, then that can be perceived as prying. So yes, it does take some sensitivity. Absolutely. Mutuality, I mean, that's the other thing in peer support that we love. It's not about, I'm just a blank slate and I'm going to find out about you so that we can make some recommendations. No, you're going to talk about something and I'm going to share what, how that feels in me, or something that it brings up for me. And it's really a two-way exchange. And sometimes I feel like people who have really been, pushed aside and marginalized and told that they don't have something to give, when they are honored with hearing your personal stuff and yet you trust them with that, sometimes that's the biggest gift we can give, is actually just having a mutual relationship. And then moving towards really has to do with hope, and the fact that, we kind of look for ways in our conversation of what has come up here in this conversation between the two of us that wasn't there before, and what does it allow us to kind of think forward to of, what is the hope that's emerged out of this conversation. There's also the 3 principles of IPS that all this is based on, and it's one of, I hope this isn't too much for you guys, but I just wanted to cover it briefly because it's so important to everything that we're doing. We talk about moving from helping to learning together, and that is such a huge one, because when we're helping someone, we're assuming that we know more, that we have a more right idea of what should be, and we're going to help you get over here, help you. Oops, I get over here, help you become more like me. And you know, if you're being told there's something wrong with you, it's just, gosh, it gets so tiring to feel like you always have to be helped, you know, like, what the heck? But instead, you know, we're not trying to help you or fix you or change you. We're trying to learn with you. I mean, we want to know you. It's a very different approach and really puts things on an egalitarian, you know, it just really diminishes those power imbalances. Moving from the individual to relationship. It's not just me, it's not just you. Suddenly there's an us. And that us is actually like another entity or thing. What is here now? Because we have this relationship. How does my scenario feel different? Moving from fear to hope, that's kind of an obvious one. But you know, it's also it's okay for people to be fearful. It's natural that people have those, and but feeling safe enough to talk about it can also be something that actually helps us to release the fear. And these are just some phrases that you might hear if someone was using intentional peer support, and I just wanted to share those. Like, I wonder how that feels. You know, you've just told me something, you know, that's really troubling for you. Wow, I wonder how that feels. I wonder why that happened. I wonder how they felt. Help me understand. Curiosity, absolutely. Help me understand how that might look. So it's like trying to have a new conversation to get to, like, what's the real untold story underneath what maybe sometimes people complain because a person will tell a story over and over and over. Sometimes it's because maybe they haven't been listened to well enough to actually get to the untold story. There's something else underneath that just keeps driving it, and they just can't even quite put their finger on what it is. We inquire, right? How did you learn to do that? Or how did you learn to make that kind of sense of this situation? What makes it so hard? What do you want to see happen? Or, gosh, what would you have to believe to have what you want in that situation? Just really exploring. Gosh, this now is suddenly seeming like a really long presentation. The Warmline history, I mentioned David Romprey. Naming the Warmline after him, like I said, kind of gives us that foundation and our roots in the movement and peers and peer leadership. Angel Prater, I want to mention, because she's an IPS trainer who's now the ED at Folk Time. She spent a long time and a lot of hard work developing the Warmline. From the days when it was just a few counties funding it, they'd had $5,000 from 3 counties, and that was the whole thing. We're a lot bigger than that now, but she did a great job of really championing it for years, and so I just feel like she needs to be mentioned. The Warmline, if you Google Warmline, David Romprey, Oregon Warmline comes up first. We love that. We've been around for a long time, and I'm really, really proud of the fact that, you know, it's been held and carried by a number of people, but like, you know, Robin in this room, who's been there for 6 years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's just great that we've actually successfully carried it forward, and we make it available not only to everyone in Oregon, but people call us from all over the U.S. I mean, the majority of our calls are Oregon, but we have some regular callers from quite a few other places. And the call volume is high. We are about 20,000 calls annually, but what it comes down to is that, you know, we need to get up to having probably 4 staff all the time, and the state has actually given us a little additional funds, so we're hiring extra staff, but we're really working hard to have enough staff on that there's not long waits. People do sometimes have to wait, and we're excited. We got a callback system, so the technology supports us by calling people back, but we have to have a certain number of people on just so that everybody gets held in the system. So it's really, you know, we're really loving each other and the peer support. What is challenging for us is the technology and getting enough people on, but we're working on it. Cost savings. We do this wonderful thing where I think I took out the slide that showed the big amount of cost savings, but we ask people, what other service might you have used if you didn't have the Warmline to call today? And so we total up those visit costs, and our numbers are showing right now that over the course of the last year, the state saved almost $2 million by sustaining the Warmline. So the funding we get, we use well, and we are definitely a prevention service. We ask people where they're calling from, so we know like what counties are using our service, what their reason was the call helpful, and what they might have done if they didn't call us. There's the Oregon Senior Peer Outreach. They are reducing loneliness one connection at a time. I just threw on these slides because I wanted to make sure I mentioned this new program. We're actually exploring right now the possibility of starting a similar call service to better serve veterans, not with crisis services, but just with friendship and having that, that warm connection where we'd have a vets calling vets and modeling it after maybe the design of the senior program. So the senior program's doing really great. Our seniors are amazing. The people that we hire to work with them are also 55 plus. They're also doing intentional peer support, and so they're developing those relationships week after week, which is 1 or 2 calls to average about up to a half hour. And this is Robin and Todd. This is just our leadership team. Robin and Lori are the supervisors for the Warmline. Todd is the supervisor for the seniors, and I get the honor of just kind of herding us all together. But we're a really great team, and I think it works really well just because we actually do have a wonderful team. So it's really a pleasure. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
And those are David Romfrey's tennis shoes.
That's right.
And every day we try to fill his shoes.
Yeah.